The stars above the Quran passage looked cold and dead, like tiny lights frozen inside black glass. Nothing moved there except ships, and even ships looked small in that endless dark. On the bridge of the battlecruiser Knight Sovereign, Fleet Marshal Cale Varon stood with his hands behind his back and watched a single human warship drifting ahead of him. It was alone. That was the strange part. Cale had come with 6 armed escorts, 7 warships against 1. In all his years of service to the Draxan Dominion, that had always been enough to end a problem before it began. Smaller nations surrendered, weaker fleets backed away, frightened captains begged for mercy. But this human ship did nothing. It did not turn away, it did not raise shields, it did not charge weapons. It simply floated in silence, its dim gold lights blinking in a slow, steady pattern, as if it had all the time in the universe. Cale narrowed his pale eyes. He was a feared commander, a man who had broken rebellions and crushed border wars without losing a single battle. He knew pride when he saw it. He knew foolishness, too. Yet this did not look like either. The human vessel was long, dark, and sharp-edged, built more for war than beauty. Its name had come through on a first hail nearly an hour earlier, UES Resolute Dawn, a warship of the United Earth Command. The voice that answered was calm, female, clear. No panic, no trembling, no rushed excuses. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Young species were never this calm. "Open a full-spectrum scan," Cale ordered. At the sensor station, Specialist Ref Sol straightened in his seat. He was one of the best scan analysts in the fleet, young but exact, the kind who trusted numbers more than instinct. "Yes, Marshal." The deep scan array powered up with a low hum across the bridge. Blue lines flashed over Reth's screen as the system began pushing wave after wave through the human hull. It would reveal armor layers, power systems, life signs, weapons, structural design, everything that mattered. Most ships reacted when that kind of scan touched them. This one did not. That silence spread across the bridge like a shadow. Cale stepped closer to the front display, staring at the human ship. Why would they allow this? Why sit still and let an enemy see everything? On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Commander Mira Voss sat in her chair and listened to the quiet breathing of her ship. The floor vibrated softly under her boots from the steady pulse of 3 fusion cores. Around her, officers worked in complete discipline. No one was shouting. No one was afraid. Mira had already given the order. "Let them scan," she had said. Now she watched the enemy fleet through the tactical screen, her face unreadable, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. She knew what the Draxan would find. More importantly, she knew what they would feel when they found it. Back on the Knight Sovereign, the first scan results appeared. Reth frowned. Then he checked the calibration. Then he checked it again. His throat tightened. "Marshal?" he said quietly. Cale turned. Reth's eyes were fixed on the screen now, and the color had drained from his face. "That can't be right." Cale stepped toward him, slow and cold. On the screen, the first impossible numbers had already begun to appear. And this was only the beginning. But when the next layer of the scan opened, the Draxan would discover that the human ship was not trapped in the dark with them.
Reth's hand shook over the sensor panel. "Run it again," Cale said, his voice low and sharp. "I already did, Marshal." "Then do it a 3rd time." Reth swallowed and obeyed. Blue light moved across his face as the scanning system swept over the human warship once more. The bridge of the Knight Sovereign became so quiet that even the hum of the life support vents sounded loud. Again, the same numbers came back. The same impossible numbers. Reth slowly turned in his seat. "The mass reading is wrong. but it keeps staying wrong in the same way. Kale stepped closer. Explain. Reth enlarged the data on the main screen. The human warship, UES Resolute Dawn, appeared as a long black shape surrounded by lines of code, energy maps, and density readings. Its outer hull size matches what we see, Reth said carefully, but the internal density is far beyond any known naval structure. It is as if the ship contains several times more matter than its frame should allow. Kale stared at the display. Hidden cargo? No, Marshal. Cargo shifts. This is fixed throughout the core structure. Reth hesitated. It is like the inside of the ship is built around something much heavier than any normal reactor or weapons system. A murmur spread across the bridge. Heavier than a dreadnought? One officer whispered. Reth answered without looking away from the screen. Heavier than two. Kale's jaw tightened. That is impossible. Yes, Reth said. It should be. On the Resolute Dawn, Commander Mira Voss watched her own sensor officer raise an eyebrow. They've reached the core weight readings, Lieutenant Elias Trent said. Mira gave a small nod, and now they're afraid to trust their own machines. There was no joy in her voice, only calm, only memory. She had seen fear before, real fear, the kind born from painful lessons and burned cities. She remembered the war on Earth's outer colonies when pirate kings had believed human ships would break after one hard blow. She remembered rescue crews pulling children from metal ruins. She remembered promises made over ashes. Humanity had changed after those years. It had become quieter, harder, more patient. They still haven't asked what the core is, Trent said. They won't, not yet. First, they'll tell themselves there's a mistake. Then they'll invent reasons. Pride always buys itself time before truth arrives. Back on the Night Sovereign, Kale refused to let doubt show on his face. What about weapons? He asked. Reth brought up another layer of the scan. That is another problem, Marshal. Another? The human vessel has fewer visible gun ports than expected. Missile bays are concealed behind segmented armor. Energy signatures suggest spinal weapons buried beneath the hull. He paused, then added softly, and the armor itself. Kale's eyes narrowed. What about it? It repairs micro-damage while we scan it. For the first time, Kale said nothing. The words seemed to hang in the air like frost. Self-repairing armor, impossible mass, hidden weapons, a silent ship facing 7 enemies without moving an inch. Kale looked again at the distant shape on the forward screen. The human warship did not look larger. It did not glow brighter. It did not threaten them with noise or speed. That somehow made it worse. It was not trying to look dangerous. It simply was. Then a new alert sounded from Reth's station. His breath caught. There's more, he whispered. Kale turned sharply. Speak. Reth lifted his eyes, and there was real fear in them now. The deepest scan layer just opened, Marshal, and there are sections inside that ship our sensors still cannot see through. The Draxon had scanned the hull, the weapons, and the armor, but whatever was buried in the center of the human warship was still hidden, and it was waking up.
Reth stared at the screen as if the numbers might change out of shame. They did not. The bridge of the Night Sovereign had gone so quiet that every breath sounded too loud. Fleet Marshal Kale Varon stood beside the sensor station, his face cold, his body still. But inside him, something sharp had begun to move. It was not panic. He had seen panic before, in broken crews and defeated captains. This was worse. It was the feeling of meeting something he did not fully understand. Read it from the beginning, Kale said. Ref nodded once. His throat looked dry. "The human ship has 1,847 crew aboard," he said. "All battle stations are manned. Weapons crews are ready. Engineering is fully staffed. Damage teams are already in position." Kale listened without blinking. "A prepared ship," he said. "Yes, Marshal," Reth replied, "but that is not the strange part." Kale's pale eyes shifted toward him. "Go on." Reth swallowed. "Their biometrics are wrong." A few officers exchanged nervous looks. "Wrong how?" Kale asked. "In every armed standoff we have ever recorded, fear shows itself. Stress hormones rise, heart rhythm changes, aggression, panic, desperation. Something appears." He hesitated. "But not here." Kale looked at the screen himself. The words were simple. The meaning was not. No panic markers, no collapse response, no signs of forced sedation. Their minds are active, alert, focused. He took a slow breath. But their fear response is almost absent. One of the bridge officers whispered, "That is impossible." Reth answered without turning, "That word keeps appearing tonight." On the resolute dawn, Commander Mira Voss stood from her chair and walked slowly toward the main display. Beyond it, the alien fleet hung in the dark like waiting wolves. Her crew remained steady. No shouting, no shaking hands, no desperate glances. Just quiet people doing hard jobs. She looked at Lieutenant Trent. "They've reached the biometrics, haven't they?" He nodded. "Yes, Commander." Mira's face softened for only a second. She thought of Earth, of old wars, of burned skies and history files, of grandparents telling children that survival was never a gift, only a duty. Humanity had paid dearly for its calm. It had not been born brave. It had been shaped by pain, loss, and lesson after lesson written in blood. "We learned too well," she said quietly. Trent heard her, but did not answer. Back on the Night Sovereign, Kale's mind was racing now, even if his face revealed nothing. A ship with impossible armor, weapons hidden inside a frame too small to carry them, a crew at full battle readiness, and nearly 2,000 humans who were not afraid. He looked up at the silent vessel on the forward screen. They had allowed the scan. They wanted him to see this. That truth landed harder than any weapon. Then another alert pulsed across Reth's console. The young analyst froze. "Marshal," he whispered. Kale turned sharply. "What now?" Reth's hands hovered over the display. "There is a sealed section in the lower hull. The shielding is different, denser, designed to block observation." Kale felt the bridge watching him, waiting for him. "Can you open it?" he asked. Reth's voice became very small. "I already did." He looked up, and the fear in his eyes was no longer hidden. "The lower deck is not storage, it is an armory." Kale said nothing. Reth forced the final words out. "And whatever the humans hid down there, our science says it should not exist yet." The Draxan had just learned the human crew did not fear death, but what they found in the sealed armory suggested humans had built something far worse than death. Fleet Marshal Kale Varen did not speak for a long time. He stood in front of the wide bridge window and stared at the human warship drifting in silence. The ship looked small against the black ocean of space. It still had the same slow lights. It still gave no threat signal. It still looked almost calm. That calm had become unbearable. Behind him, no one on the bridge moved more than they had to. Even the proud officers of the Draxan Dominion had gone quiet. A few minutes earlier, they had believed they were looking at a trapped ship. Now they understood they might be looking at a warning. Kale finally turned. "Bring me everything we know about humans," he said. His intelligence officer, Sarah Thalen, stepped forward at once. She was sharp, disciplined, and never wasted words. "At once, Marshal." Data arose across the center display in blue and silver lines. Old reports, first contact notes, trade records, military estimates. Cale read them with cold focus, but the deeper he looked, the heavier his thoughts became. The first truth hit him like a slow blade. Human civilization was older than the Dominion had believed, much older. Not 1 or 2,000 years of organized struggle, nearly 10,000 years of wars, collapses, recoveries, revolutions, and survival. Cale's eyes moved from line to line. "They fought each other for all that time?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "Again and again. Different nations, different causes, different ages. Their methods changed, but conflict never truly left them." One officer laughed nervously. "Then they should be broken." "No," Cale said, still reading. "If they were weak, they would already be dead." That answer silenced the room. He kept reading. Humans had built weapons powerful enough to destroy their own cities, then still survived. They had come close to ruin more than once, yet each time they rebuilt, learned, changed, and came back harder. Cale felt something bitter move in his chest. The fear he had first felt from the scan was changing now. It was becoming respect. On the Resolute Dawn, Commander Mira Voss watched the enemy fleet hold position. No new weapon charges, no aggressive movement, no boarding craft. Lieutenant Trent looked toward her. "They're digging through our history now." Mira gave a small, tired smile. "Then they're finally asking the right question." "And what question is that?" She looked at the stars. "Not whether we can fight," she said softly, "but what kind of species survives long enough to stop being frightened by power." Back on the Night Sovereign, Sarah opened the next section of the file. "Marshal," she said, and for the first time her voice was not fully steady. "The human ship class has a registered hull number." Cale turned. "Go on." "This vessel is Resolute Class Hull 412. The bridge went still again. 412? Someone whispered. Sarah nodded. "At minimum. And according to intercepted data, this class is not their highest level warship." Cale stared at the screen. "How many classes above it?" Sarah swallowed. 4 confirmed. Data incomplete." A chill passed through the room. Cale looked back at the single ship outside the window. One ship, one patient ship, and it was not even close to humanity's best. For the first time in his life, Cale Varen understood what it meant to stand on the wrong side of a future war. And he also understood one more thing. The humans wanted him to know. Cale had learned the human ship was only a middle-tier warship, but the next decision he made would decide whether this meeting became the start of peace or the first page of extinction. Fleet Marshal Cale Varen stood in silence for several more seconds after reading the last report. The bridge of the Night Sovereign waited with him. He could feel every eye on his back, but no one spoke. No one wanted to be the first to say what all of them already knew. If they attacked, they might die. If they turned away without a word, the whole sector would hear about it. Either choice would change everything. Cale looked once more at the human ship outside the viewport. It still drifted there in the darkness with the same slow amber lights, calm, patient, unmoving. He hated how calm it looked. But deep inside, under the pride and the anger, another feeling had started to grow. Respect. He turned toward his officers. "There is a third path." Ref lifted his head slowly. "Communication, Marshal?" Cale gave a single nod. "Yes." No one argued. That silence told him enough. On the Resolute Dawn, Commander Mira Voss was signing off on a maintenance report when the communications officer looked up. "Commander," he said, "the Draxon flagship is requesting an open visual channel." Mira closed the report and set it aside. Her face did not change, but her heartbeat rose just a little. Not from fear, from focus. This was the moment she had expected. "Accept it," she said. "Full bridge display." The main screen shifted. A second later, the bridge of the Night Sovereign appeared in front of her, larger than hers, colder, sharper, built to impress. At the center stood Cale Varren, tall and still, his pale eyes fixed on her. He began speaking in the common trade language. Mira answered him in fluent Draxan. For the first time since this standoff began, Cale's expression moved. Only slightly, but it moved. "You learned our language," he said. "I had time," Mira replied. That answer unsettled him more than if she had threatened him. Cale folded his hands behind his back. "You are in space claimed by the Draxan Dominion." Mira's voice stayed calm. "Your government claims it. Mine does not. We consider this open space." Cale studied her for a long moment. She did not look away. "You allowed the scan," he said at last. "Why?" Mira had thought about many answers during the long wait. She chose the simplest one. Because hiding our strength would create confusion, and confusion starts wars. A quiet ripple moved across the Draxan bridge. Cale's eyes narrowed. "So you wanted us to see?" "Yes." "And fear what we found?" Mira paused. Then she gave him the small twist he had not expected. "No," she said softly. "I wanted you to understand." That landed harder than a threat. On the Draxan bridge, even Reth stopped breathing for a second. Cale felt something heavy settle in his chest. She was not mocking him. She was not boasting. That made her words more dangerous. He asked the next question carefully. "What does your government want?" "A formal border agreement, shared corridor access, safe passage for neutral traffic, clear rules, fewer reasons for people like us to meet this way." Cale stared at her. There it was. Not surrender, not a demand shouted from strength. An offer, a way out. And somehow that made this moment even more serious. Behind Mira, her officers stayed calm. Behind Cale, his crew stood frozen between fear and hope. At last, Cale spoke. "I cannot agree alone." "I know," Mira said. "Neither can I. But now the right people can talk." The channel remained open, and for the first time that day, the dark between the two ships no longer felt like the edge of a battlefield. It felt like the beginning of something dangerous in a different way, something fragile, something that could still break. But peace in space was the easy part, because the next battle would happen inside Cale's own empire, where pride was far deadlier than any human warship. 3 months later, Fleet Marshal Kyle Varren stood alone in the Hall of Judgment, the oldest chamber in the Draxan Dominion. The room was made of dark stone from the Draxan homeworld. It held sound in a strange way. Every word spoken there felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. High above Kyle, 9 counselors sat in a curved row of black seats. Their faces were still, their eyes were sharp. Kyle had stood in this hall before. He had stood there when he was praised for victories. He had stood there when borders were expanded in his name. He had stood there as a hero. Today felt different. Today, he had come to ask for peace. At the center sat High Counselor Vareth, oldest among them, cold-eyed and slow-speaking. He leaned forward and looked down at Kyle. "You are recommending a formal non-aggression treaty," Vareth said, "with a species that has been in space less than a century?" Kyle did not lower his head. "Yes." A murmur moved through the chamber. Another counselor, broad-shouldered and harsh-faced, struck the arm of his chair. "You had 7 warships. They had 1, And you came back asking for negotiation? Kyle's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. I came back asking the Dominion to survive. That silenced the room. For a moment, no one moved. Vareth's eyes narrowed. Explain. Kyle took one slow breath. You read the scan report. You saw the hull, the weapons, the power systems, the sealed lower decks. You saw what that one human ship could do. He looked from one counselor to the next. But the weapons were not the most dangerous thing. A younger counselor frowned. Then what was? Kyle answered without hesitation. The calm. He felt some of them stiffen. They were surrounded, unnumbered, fully scanned, one mistake away from war, yet their crew remained steady. No panic, no confusion, no cracks. They were not pretending, they were ready. He paused, and the memory came back sharply. Mira Voss on the screen, calm as still water, speaking like someone who had already seen the end of the conversation before it began. They did not show fear, Kyle continued, and that matters more than pride wants to admit. One counselor gave a bitter laugh. You were afraid. Kyle looked directly at him. Yes, he said. The word fell like iron. I was afraid enough to think clearly. No one spoke after that. Kyle took a step forward. Fear is not always weakness, he said. Sometimes fear is the last warning before foolish men destroy everything. His voice grew deeper, heavier. That ship was not humanity's best. It was a middle-level warship. We know there are hundreds like it, and more powerful classes above it. They let us scan them on purpose. They wanted us to understand exactly enough. The chamber felt colder now. They did not come begging, Kyle said. They came patient, controlled, prepared. They offered us a door instead of a grave. Vareth studied him for a long time. And if we reject this treaty? Kyle's answer came like a blade. Then the next conversation will not happen in a hall like this. The silence after that was long and painful, because for the first time, the council understood what Kyle had truly brought home. Not surrender, not shame, a chance. But while the council argued over pride and power, far away in the corridor, Commander Mira Voss received a message from Earth, and what it said could either save the future or end the last hope of peace. 41 days after the council vote, Commander Mira Voss stood in the quiet light of her ready room and read the message from Earth for the third time. Her face stayed calm, but her chest felt warm in a way she had not allowed herself to feel for many weeks. The talks were approved. Formal treaty talks, neutral station, shared observers, human diplomats already on the way. For the first time since the standoff in the corridor, she let herself sit down slowly and breathe like a tired human being instead of a commander who always had to stay steady. Outside her small window, the stars were still cold and distant, but they no longer looked empty. Lieutenant Trent stood near the door, watching her carefully. Good news? Mira looked up at him and gave a small smile. It was not a large smile, she was not that kind of person, but it was real. Yes, she said, the next step is happening. Trent let out a breath he had been holding for days. So all of this meant something? Mira looked back at the message screen. It always meant something. We just didn't know yet if anyone would be brave enough to admit it. The official message was short and clean. Earth wanted a formal border agreement. Earth wanted safe travel through the corridor. Earth wanted stability, not conquest. But there was one line Mira kept reading again and again. Proceed carefully. Some in the Dominion still prefer fear over peace. That line stayed with her, because peace was never born in comfort. It was born in rooms full of doubt, pride, memory, and people who had every reason not to trust each other. On the other side of the border, Fleet Marshal Kyle Varen stood in a military docking bay and watched transport craft load records, maps, and legal files for the coming talks. He had won the council vote, but it had not felt like victory. Too many officers still looked at him with silent questions. Too many saw caution as weakness. Too many still believed the old way was the only way. Sub-Commander Reth Sol stepped beside him. Some of them think the humans frightened us into this. Kale kept his eyes on the transport crews. They did frighten us. Reth glanced at him, surprised. Kale finally turned. His expression was hard, but his voice was quiet. The difference is that fear can make fools of weak men, or wisdom of living men. Reth lowered his eyes. Do you trust them? Kale thought of Mira Voss, her steady voice, her patience, her refusal to brag, the human ship waiting in silence while 7 enemy warships surrounded it. I trust that they understand war, he said, and I trust that they know exactly how much it costs. That to him meant more than pretty promises ever could. Days later, the first negotiation station came into view, a neutral outpost of silver rings and white signal lights floating between territories, far from flags and homeworld pride. Human and Draxan ships arrived from different directions, slowing one by one into the same calm orbit. Mira watched the station grow larger on the screen. Across the stars, Kale watched it too. Neither smiled, neither relaxed, but both understood the same thing. If this failed, the galaxy would remember the failure for generations. If it worked, maybe something stronger than fear could finally begin. But when Mira and Kale prepared for their first face-to-face meeting, neither of them knew that one small mistake on the station was already pushing the talks toward disaster.
The neutral station was built for peace, but it did not feel peaceful. It floated in open space like a silver ring surrounded by small white lights, quiet and cold. Human ships waited on one side. Draxan ships waited on the other. Between them was a station full of guards, diplomats, clerks, translators, and people trying very hard not to make history worse. Commander Nira Voss stepped out of the shuttle with slow, steady steps. Her uniform was plain, her face was calm, but inside she could feel the weight of the moment pressing against her ribs. This was not a battlefield. That made it more dangerous. On the far side of the receiving hall, Fleet Marshal Kale Varen arrived with his own delegation. He saw Mira at once. She saw him, too. Neither smiled, but both gave a respectful nod. It was enough. For a second, Mira thought maybe this could work. Then the mistake happened. A young station officer rushed across the hall carrying updated seating assignments for the first session. He was nervous, sweating, and moving too fast. As he passed the Draxan side, one of the data tablets slipped from his hands and struck the floor. The screen lit up, and for one terrible second, everyone nearby saw the wrong title on the document: Containment Protocols in Case of Draxan Aggression. The hall froze. No one breathed. The words had been meant for a private emergency file, one of many station safety preparations. But in that moment, it did not look like a safety file. It looked like an insult, a trap, a lie. Draxan guards stepped forward at once. Human security officers moved too. Hands touched weapons, not drawing them, but close enough. Mira felt her stomach turn cold. Not now, she thought. Not like this. Kale's face hardened. The old iron came back into his eyes. Behind him,
2 council representatives began speaking at once, angry and sharp. "So this is peace?" one of them snapped. "You invite us here and prepare for our violence before we even enter the room?" The young station officer looked as if he might faint. "It's standard emergency planning," he whispered. I didn't mean—" "That does not matter," the Draxan envoy said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mira took one step forward, but Kale moved first. His voice was low, controlled, and dangerous. "Everyone stays where they are." That stopped both sides. He turned to the trembling officer on the floor, then to the screen, then finally to Mira. "This was careless," he said. Mira nodded once. Yes. Not denial, not excuses, just truth. Kale studied her face for a long moment. She did not look away. Then Mira spoke, her voice quiet but clear enough for the whole hall. "We prepared for danger because peace matters. We did not come here to humiliate you. We came because the cost of failure is too high for both of us." Silence followed. Heavy silence, the kind that decides futures. Kale looked at the armed guards on both sides, then at the frightened station worker still kneeling beside the broken tablet. Something changed in his expression. Not softness, but restraint. And in a place like this, restraint was almost mercy. The guards had not fired, and the meeting had not collapsed. But behind the closed doors of the first negotiation room, one angry voice was about to demand an end to peace before it could even begin. The first negotiation room was quiet, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that came before damage. Commander Mira Voss sat at one side of the long silver table. Across from her sat Fleet Marshal Kale Varen, his back straight, his face calm, but his eyes alert. Around them were diplomats, legal officers, translators, and security staff from both sides. Everyone had entered the room carrying years of fear, pride, and memory. And now one mistake in the hallway had followed them inside. The broken tablet had already been removed, but the words people had seen were still alive in the room. Containment protocols in case of Draxan aggression. No one had forgotten them. A Draxan council representative named Voran leaned forward sharply. He had been angry from the start, but now he no longer cared to hide it. "This meeting is poisoned," he said. "You claim peace while preparing for our violence before a single word is spoken. That is not respect. That is judgment." His voice struck the room like metal. One of the human diplomats started to answer, but Mira raised a hand slightly. She would speak herself. Before she could, Voran pointed at her. "Did you know about that file?" Mira held his gaze. "No." "Do you deny such planning exists?" "No," she said. That answer shook the room harder than a lie would have. Voran almost smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Then we are right to question your honesty." The air seemed to tighten. Kale remained still, but inside his thoughts were moving fast. He knew this was the moment. One wrong word now, and all the careful work of the last months could fall apart. Mira spoke before anyone else could. "We prepared for danger because adults prepare for danger," she said quietly. "That file was not hatred, it was caution." Voran's eyes narrowed. "Convenient." Mira's voice did not rise. "Would you like me to pretend your fleets do not scare people?" That hit harder than shouting. The room froze again. Then Kale did something unexpected. He turned his head toward one of his own aides. "Bring up our station entry brief." The aide hesitated. "Marshal? Now." A screen lit up beside the Draxan side of the table. A private emergency document appeared, and its title was painfully clear: Response Measures in Case of Human Treachery. This time the silence felt different, not sharp, ashamed. Voran's expression changed first, then several humans looked down. Mira stared at the screen for a long second, then slowly let out a breath. Kale folded his hands on the table. It seems, he said, that fear traveled here on both sides. No one answered, because no one could. The truth had entered the room, and truth was hard to fight. Mira looked at Kale. For the first time since arriving on the station, there was something softer in her face. Not trust, but honesty. Yes, she said, it did. Kale nodded once. Then let us stop punishing each other for being careful. The word settled over the room like rain over fire. Vorin leaned back at last, still unhappy but quieter now. The human diplomats relaxed a little. Pens were lifted again, screens reopened, breathing returned. Peace had not won, but it had survived, and sometimes survival was the first form of victory. The meeting was saved, but before the next session could begin, an emergency signal burst into the station, and both sides were about to face the first real test of whether this new peace meant anything at all.
The signal came in so suddenly that everyone in the negotiation room looked up at the same time. A red warning light flashed across the station wall, then another. Then the calm station voice, which had sounded so gentle all day, changed into something sharp and urgent. Emergency alert. Cargo Ring 3 has suffered a containment failure. Civilian transport docked in Bay 9. Fire risk rising. Medical teams requested immediately. For 1 second, no one moved. Then the room split in two. Some people jumped to their feet in alarm. Others reached for comm units. Security officers rushed to the doors. A human diplomat whispered, "There are families on that transport." On the Draxon side, one of the aides pulled up a station map and his face turned pale. Bay 9 was close to the pressure seals. If those failed, hundreds could die. Commander Mira Voss was already standing. "What kind of cargo?" she asked. A station official answered, almost choking on the words. "Fuel cells and life support containers. The fire suppression system is damaged." Fleet Marshal Kale Varen rose at the same moment. His voice cut through the panic like steel. "How many trapped?" "Unknown," the official said. "At least 60 on the ship, more in the loading area." Mira and Kale looked at each other across the table. All the arguments from earlier were still alive in the room. The mistrust, the old fear, the thin, fragile peace that had nearly broken. But none of that mattered now. There were civilians in danger. "We can seal the outer ring," one station officer said. "No," another replied. "If we seal it fully, the trapped people lose escape routes." The room was turning into confusion again. Mira took one step forward. "My people are trained for shipboard fire and hull emergencies." Kale answered at once. "Mine are trained for mass evacuation under pressure loss." Their eyes met, and in that moment both of them understood the same truth. Neither side could save everyone alone. Kale turned to his officers. "Deploy rescue teams." Mira gave her own order at the same time. "Send medics, engineers, and damage crews." For a brief second, the room froze in surprise. Then it moved like a living machine. Human and Draxon personnel ran side by side into the corridor. Station alarms echoed through the metal halls. Smoke warnings spread across internal screens. Somewhere far away, someone screamed. Somewhere else, a child was crying. Mira reached the emergency tram first. Kale stepped in beside her without a word. The tram shot through the station at full speed. Red light flashed across their faces. Neither of them sat down. "How bad?" Kale asked. Mira looked at the map. "Bad enough." He nodded once. "Then let's not waste time." When the tram doors opened, heat rolled in like a living wall. Cargo Ring 3 was half covered in smoke. A transport vessel had been torn open along one side. Crates were burning. Sprinkler foam covered the floor. Station workers were trying to drag the injured back through the haze. And in the middle of all that fear, human and Draxon rescue teams rushed forward together. No speeches, no politics, just action. Mira pulled a child from behind a broken crate. Kale helped lift a fallen beam off 2 trapped dock workers. Engineers from both sides worked shoulder to shoulder
At the damaged pressure lock, medics treated whoever they reached first, without asking where they came from. And slowly, in the middle of smoke and fear, something changed. The people in that burning ring stopped seeing uniforms. They started seeing help. But just when it seemed the worst was under control, the station gave a new warning, and Mira realized one final explosion could kill everyone still inside the ring. The warning came through the smoke with cruel clarity. Reactor chain risk detected. Structural collapse in 2 minutes. Commander Mira Voss froze for only half a second. Then she moved. The damaged cargo ring around her was full of heat, sparks, and screaming alarms. Burned metal hung in the air. The floor shook under her boots as another small blast hit somewhere deeper in the transport bay. Around her, humans and Draxon were still pulling survivors through the smoke, carrying the injured, sealing broken lines, and dragging open jammed doors. But Mira already understood the truth. If the unstable fuel cells went up together, everyone still inside the ring would die. She hit her comm. All rescue teams begin fallback routes now. Across the firelit corridor, Fleet Marshal Cale Varyn looked up sharply. He had blood on one sleeve that was not his own. Beside him, 2 Draxon engineers were trying to hold a warped pressure door open while trapped civilians crawled through. "How long?" he demanded. Mira checked the station display again. "Less than 2 minutes." Cale did not waste one breath on fear. "How many still inside?" "Too many," Mira said. That answer hit both of them like a blade. A station medic ran toward them carrying a little girl wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. The child was crying for her father. Behind her, a Draxon dock worker stumbled through the smoke, half blind, led by a human engineer who was coughing so hard he could barely stand. No one cared anymore who belonged to which side. They only cared who was still alive. Mira's eyes locked onto the central control column near the damaged transport. It was burning, but not gone. If the emergency venting system could be forced open manually, some of the blast pressure might dump into space instead through the whole ring. Might. It was a terrible chance, but it was still a chance. "I can vent the bay," she said. Cale turned toward her. "You will not make it back in time." "I know." For the first time since meeting her, Cale's face truly changed, not into fear, into pain. He had seen brave officers before. He had sent them into danger, but this felt different, too personal, too human. "You are the lead delegate," he said quietly. "If you die here, if I do nothing, they die here," Mira answered. Their eyes held for one hard second. Then Cale made his choice. "No," he said. "You get the civilians out. I'll open the vent." Mira stared at him. "You don't know the sequence. Then tell me while I run." He was already moving. Mira swore under her breath and ran beside him through the smoke. Behind them, rescue teams dragged the last survivors toward the emergency tram. Ahead of them, the burning control column spat sparks into the dark. Mira shouted the sequence over the alarms. Cale repeated every step back to her, calm and exact. 1 command. 2. 3. The panel finally lit. "Manual release ready," Cale said. The station timer dropped lower. Mira looked at the civilians being carried out, at the crying child, at the wounded workers, at the mixed rescue teams fighting side by side. Then she looked at Cale. "On my mark," he nodded once. Together, in fire and smoke and rising death, the human commander and the alien marshal slammed their hands down on the final release, and the whole ring began to scream. The vent system had opened, but whether it would save the station or tear the entire section apart, no one knew yet, and the answer would decide not only who lived, but what kind of future both species deserved. For one long second after Commander Mira Voss and and Fleet Marshal Cale Varen slammed their hands onto the emergency release, nothing happened. Then the cargo ring shook so hard that the floor nearly threw them down. A deep metal scream rushed through the station as the vent system opened. Warning lights flashed white, then red, then white again. The damaged bay doors split apart, and burning air, smoke, and pressure blasted out into space in a violent roar. Mira grabbed the edge of the control frame. Cale caught a broken support rail with one hand and held his ground. The force hit like a storm. Then, slowly, the shaking began to weaken. The fire did not vanish at once, but it changed. Instead of building toward one final explosion, the flames pulled outward with the vented air. The pressure dropped. The worst of the blast risk was gone. Mira looked at the emergency display. The timer disappeared. A new message replaced it. Chain reaction interrupted. Structural collapse avoided. For the first time in many minutes, she let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her chest forever. "We did it," she whispered. Cale looked at the screen, then at the smoke-filled ring around them. Human medics were still carrying survivors. Draxan engineers were still sealing damaged lines. Station workers were crying, coughing, praying, and helping each other stand. "Yes," he said quietly, "we did. Not humans, not Draxan. We." That word mattered. Minutes later, the last civilians were evacuated. The crying little girl found her father near the tram doors and ran into his arms so hard that both of them fell to their knees. A burned dock worker reached for the human engineer who had guided him through the smoke and gripped his arm without saying a word. Nearby, a Draxan medic wrapped a blanket around an elderly human woman and stayed with her until her breathing slowed. No one in that ring was thinking about treaties anymore. They were thinking about the simple miracle of being alive. Hours later, after the fires were fully controlled and the station was stable again, the delegations gathered once more in the main chamber. This time, the room felt different, still tired, still tense, but different. People had seen each other bleed, seen each other save children, seen each other run into danger without asking who belonged to which world. That changes things. Fleet Marshal Cale Varen stood first. He looked across the room at Mira Voss, then at the council members, diplomats, officers, and station staff. "Today," he said, "we learned something more important than fear." The room stayed completely still. We learned that when death stood in front of us, both our peoples chose to protect life first. Mira rose beside him. "And that," she said softly, "is the beginning of trust." No one laughed. No one argued, because everyone there knew she was right. The treaty was signed 3 days later. The corridor remained open. Borders were clearly drawn. Neutral ships were protected. Joint rescue protocols were added by request from both sides. What began with a scan, silence, and fear ended with signatures, respect, and the first real peace either side had ever expected from the other. The uploaded story's core arc of fear turning into understanding and treaty talks moving forward is preserved here, but with a gentler, more hopeful close. Alien scanned a human warship. Alien scanned a human warship. Months later, at the first shared station in the corridor, a bronze plaque was placed near the rescue bay. It carried one line in both human and Draxan languages: "The day we stopped measuring who should fear whom and started choosing who we could become together." And when Mira read it beside Cale, both of them smiled. Not because the galaxy had become safe, but because at last it had become better. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.